Okay, all right. So we're here today. The presentation is you have a diagnosis, now what? So the first thing that I'd like to share is that you know your child better than anyone, and any parent knows their child better than anyone. I have done workshops or trainings where parents have actually come to me and asked, does the school know more about my child than I do? And that's absolutely not the case ever. Because a child is doing something or claimed to be doing something different in school than they are at home does not mean that the school knows the child better than the parent. And I had, when I was thinking about this training, I had the ability to go to some of my my friends and the families, particularly parents, and talk to them about some of the things that I was going to be presenting on. And as a sibling, you know, I have a very different perspective, although I had pretty significant feelings about my brother who was born at what we thought was normal, and diagnosed at about 1.5, and our story will be up here. But talking to parents and asking them about their feelings, how did you feel when you got a diagnosis? And the feelings that parents had given me were ranging all the way from devastation to completely elated. And actually some of the parents felt, you know, the devastation and a series of grief and then elated. And the elation and freeing component really came because you have a diagnosis, now you have something to work with. We don't, you know, if you've got a child that you just know there's something that's not quite right, but you can't put your finger on it, and you do finally get a diagnosis that's correct. I think there's really this kind of freeing component of, okay, now I know what to work with, or what I have to work with, and it's time to move on. And it allows you the ability to look at what kind of services are out there. So this is actually one parent's story, and the beginning of the story, this is from my mother's point of view. And as I said, I'm 9 years older than my brother, but initially we got a diagnosis. It was my mother and I, and my father had left soon after my brother was born. So at about a year and a half, there was a diagnosis that my brother was not meeting all the milestones of what a 1.5-year-old should do, and they concluded that it was brain damage from birth. He had a cord wrapped around his neck, and my mother thinks that was probably why. There was some complications at birth, but they thought they had gotten past the potential idea of brain damage, because at birth everything seemed okay after the concerns of the actual birth. So my mother continues to make doctor's appointments and met with medical physicians over and over, and continued to say my child is unmanageable, behavior's getting worse, I can't handle it. And the response from the doctors was really, well, your child has brain damage, and And so that's why he's acting the way that he is. And so my mom said they would kind of, it'd be 15 minutes of going back to the fact that he had brain damage, and then the doctor would feel sorry for her and send her on her way. There really wasn't, and my brother's now 33, so or 30, maybe 35, or maybe, I don't know, he's in his 30s, so this was quite a long time ago. The behavior piece, the medical doctors really didn't do any kind of a referral. And so when he was still in the medical doctor arena, he was misdiagnosed with ADHD. And from that, he was put on medication that was not the proper medication. And he actually had hallucinations and, a lot of side effects that that impeded his ability to, be who he is. And eventually, he was 12 years old. My mother found a psychiatrist that was able to determine that he had severe bipolar disorder, and the medications that he was on were actually the medications that you would use for bipolar are completely opposite of what you would use for ADHD. So for 12 years he had he had a behavior that was similar to a wild animal. And as I said, it was my mother and I. I was a teenager and really not very helpful. And how we got through it, I don't know. But I think that there's more to this story that I want to talk about. But again, as a parent, you know your child better than anybody. And if there is a question of behavior, question of just what's going on, if the diagnosis just doesn't seem to fit, you want to get second opinions. You want to go, ask for a referral if there's behavior pieces to that aren't being addressed. So this is what we were talking about in regards to a diagnosis, how a diagnosis can be freeing, because at that point your diagnosis may lead you to great things, eligibility for services. And the Medicaid waiver is one of the greatest, I think, services that we have available to us in this state. There are 4 categories that the Medicaid waiver covers, and there's the APD waiver, adults with physical disabilities, and that is identified as an adult with a physical disability that's 21 years and older. And then there's the CCMC waiver, which is children with complex medical conditions. The MRDD waiver, which is intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then the Older Alaskans waiver, which is for individuals who are 65 years or older. And in all cases of the medical waiver, the criteria really has to look like the individual would be in a nursing home, the individual would be in an institution, the individual would need some kind of care like that. Because it's a home and community-based waiver, the idea is really that that older Alaskans are put in nursing homes, and adults and children. For the CCMC waiver, children would live in a hospital, and the MRDD waiver, children would be sent to institutions. This Medicaid waiver was an alternative to that institutional or hospital level of care. So with the waiver, there are a lot of options. The waiver has changed over the years. When I was doing case management, it was a lot more open to requests. I actually would put things in the waiver. We would be able, we were able to get horseback riding in there. We were able to get, hot tubs for, and those kind of things are not so common anymore in the waiver. However, according to parents that I've talked to, this is a godsend. So if you have a child that falls into the categories that are identified here, and they would either likely be in a hospital, an institution, or a nursing home at those levels of care, I strongly advise that you apply for the Medicaid waiver. There's a wait list. The number pretty much remains the same. Probably 6 or 7 years ago, the wait list was at 1,200 within the state, and there was a change in the way that individuals were being drawn. It was, I want to say, 6 or 7 years ago, they did 100 draws a year. They now do 50 draws a quarter. So, and for the longest time, I personally, when you think of somebody being drawn, you literally think of putting your, a hat and drawing a name, and that's really not the way that the wait list works for Medicaid. The Medicaid waiver wait list really, when they draw 50 names a quarter, so we've got 4 quarters, they draw based on need. So the very worst thing that I think could be for some single parent is that they don't apply for the waiver, and when they're in crisis, they have no supports. And so if you fall into the eligibility of the Medicaid waiver, apply.